lounging, son.
Cool. Welcome back to the Comic Lounge. My name's Ryan, and with me today I have a very special guest. One of my favorite writers in comic books, Jason Aaron. There's not much that he hasn't written at Marvel. You wrote one of my all-time favorite books, Scalped, which I want to talk to you about. Got Avengers going on, Thor, Wolverine, X, everything. I mean, so much stuff. Welcome to the Comic Lounge, man.
Thanks, Ryan. Thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, dude, my pleasure. So, before we get into some of the current stuff, I do want to kind of pick your brain a little bit about some of your past work that has really resonated with me. But before we get into Scalp, because I know it's one of the earliest works you did that you did in comic books, I would like to hear the story of like what started the love for comics and what made you want to write comic books.
Well, I mean, I think what started the love for me was the spinner rack at the drugstore, at the grocery store, whenever I was running errands with my mom, just started buying stuff off the rack. I think the first issue I ever picked up was an issue of World's Finest, which was one of those big, like dollar issues. So it had a Batman story, Superman, Hawkman, Green Arrow, had, tons of stories in there. So it was a good like sample of, hey, there's this whole universe of characters out there. And I was probably 15 before I went to a comic book store. There weren't comic book stores kind of in the small town I grew up. So it was all newsstand stuff. And the New Teen Titans was kind of the first book where, I wanted every issue. I wasn't just sort of buying whatever was on the rack. That was the first one where I was like, oh, I want to go back and get the first few issues that I'd missed, and every time I saw it, I picked it up. And George Perez was the first artist whose work I could like recognize on other books. And then I remember it was a big deal the first time I found some issues of Vigilante at a used bookstore in town, which I'd never seen because they were direct market books. And I was like, what? Where did these come from? So I subscribed to it. That was the only subscription I ever had for a comic was for Vigilante, which I loved. And then went to comic convention for the first time when I was probably 13 or 14, which was Dragon Con in Atlanta. So I think that that was like me just loving comics, and that really never stopped. I never had that period where I stopped reading. I've always been bouncing. Once I found a comic book store for the first time, I've had a pull list at one place or another ever since. Where I'd follow one store to another location, move to another strip mall, and I'd move with it, and then they'd close, and I'd go to another one, and it would move, and then it would close. And so, long string of stores, but I never stopped reading. And I think I knew pretty early, I knew I loved to write. Anything I could do at school that would involve writing, I was excited about, and I had teachers who encouraged me to write. And pretty quickly kind of put the two together and, said, I'd love to write comics someday, but I had, zero clue as to how to make that happen.
Mm-hmm.
Growing up in a small town in Alabama, there's certainly nobody from my neck of the woods who was writing comic books for a living. So, it took me a while to kind of get my foot in the door and sort of, start to bring that dream to fruition. But really the love of comics as a reader and that desire to write them really never went away, from like fifth grade until now.
Yeah, that's all. I mean, I'm pretty much the same way that I never stopped. I know that like I work in a shop now and I see people come in like, oh, I haven't read for a few years. And like that's never been a part of my story. Like I fell in love with comics at probably like 5, 6, and from there it was just like I never stopped. And I think the only time there was a period where I didn't read, that was because of me making poor choices in life and getting locked up, so I could not read comics.
Oh.
So I mean, I say it often. I'm not embarrassed about my past. I don't live that life anymore. But it was just that was a part of my story. So no matter what, it was always comic books that would like in my dark times would always kind of keep me company, even when I was like really alone. And
Sure.
Speaking of something that I was kind of upset that I missed the beginning of, and we'll talk about it in a minute, is your Thor run. I missed out on the first arc because of my poor choices. And I had to, like, I jumped in, I think, in the middle of God Bomb, which was the second arc. I mean, you were already one of my favorite writers because of Scalped. And then I found out you were doing Thor, and I think you are the reason I love Thor as much as I do. It's because of what you did with the character over the 7 years. And I do want to get into it, but real quick, I do want to talk about Scalped. I know that was like, at least from my research, I know you got the Wolverine 175. You had a story in there. You did the other side at Vertigo, and then Scalped. I want to hear the story about Scalped because, I mean, I relate to it on a lot of different levels. One of them being addiction that you touch on in that story. I shared that same addiction. That's the trouble that I got into. So I think that because of that, it has always resonated with me. I've read it multiple times. I'm about to do a reread with my friend who hasn't read it before for our podcast. So I was wondering if you could just share the story, how that came to be, and really how much of yourself did you put into that story? Because it feels like a very personal story. Maybe not exactly what happened to you, but
Sure. Yeah. Well, first I'll just say, I don't know where you were locked up, but I remember when I was doing Ghostwriter, I would do the letters column, and that book was big with dudes in prison for some
oh, I
reason.
wasn't in prison. I was in
Okay.
county.
Okay, cool. Well,
So they don't let you
so
have comics.
wherever clearly there are other places where you can get a hold of comics, but
Yeah.
is like guys in prison and priests for some reason were two of the big ghostwriter audiences I tapped into. But Scalped came about from, I'd started working with Will Dennis. That was kind of, like you said, I sort of broke in with this Marvel Talent Search contest. And then like 5 years later, I broke in again with Vertigo and getting a Vietnam War book going there with the editor Will Dennis. And so, the other side was like the first full 22-page comic script I'd ever written. And once I'd kind of written a couple of those and it was going well, Will asked me to pitch some other stuff, and I'd sent probably 4 or 5 pitches. One of them was a Bible book, which is basically what ended up becoming the Goddamned, and one of them was Scalped. And Will and I were both kind of big crime genre fans, so we had talked a lot about books and movies and shows we liked, and the idea was for Scalped was kind of mixing some of those things we had talked about, some of those things he and I both liked. The idea of this, guy coming back to where he was from and going undercover as himself, and sort of, this the clash between this undercover investigator and the crime boss. Typical kind of crime story. But the twist was that it was set on a location we don't see much of, which was a modern day Native American reservation in South Dakota. And I initially pitched it to Will as a relaunch of the old Western hero Scalp Hunter, if you remember him. Like he ran, in weird Western tales, like around, alongside Jonah Hex. So I think that the very, very first pitch was there was like a story in the Old West about Scalp Hunter, and then there was like a story in the present day about one of his descendants. And Will and I kind of went back and forth a lot on the pitch and worked really hard. Will's a great editor, and then he kind of knows like when you beat the thing up and when you just sort of let it go, and all that beating up, all that work we really did, before I ever sat down to write the first issue script. So we worked on that pitch a lot, and eventually scrapped the Wild West stuff and just changed it to something wholly original with no connection to any DC characters. And I still remember it took a few tries to kind of get it approved by Karen Berger at Vertigo, and eventually, kind of on my own, I sent her this list. It was like, I don't remember how many items were on the list. I'd have to dig it up, but it was like, here's 25 reasons you should do Scalped. And I listed all these different ones of I think we'd found Gara, Gara, the artist at that point. So one of them was like, Gara's amazing. Look at the way he draws the sort of subject matter. And again, I can't remember what all the rest of it, but I had a lot of I somehow pulling it out of my ass of like all these reasons, but that worked. That Karen said that was kind of the thing that, tipped it over the edge for. I think if nothing else, I think it showed just kind of the passion I had. Like I really, really want to do this story. And then, surprisingly, we got to do that for 60 issues, which was, was kind of that's like the goal back then, right? Is like, I think everybody who's wrote in comics, you wanted to do like a big Vertigo book, a big Vertigo run. All my favorite writers had done that. And, I feel like we were kind of one of the last books that got to do that. So I'm really happy, we were able to kind of sneak in there at the end, and I'm still proud to have worked at Vertigo. I think I will always think of myself as, a Vertigo creator.
Yeah, I mean, that was an exciting time at Vertigo for me. Like, I mean, there's so many good books that came out. And like you said, I think you were like at the tail end of Vertigo. And I'm still sad. It's one of my favorite imprints of all time in comic books. And I was kind of sad to see it go. And the pairing of you and RM Guerra is phenomenal. Like, I love what the two of you guys did. Like you said, you end up doing Goddamned together. You got the Virgin Brides that is coming to an end, I believe, soon. What is that working like when you guys first hooked up for Scalp? Did that like relationship, that bond, did that build pretty quickly between you two? Like, did you know like, oh, this is somebody that I would love to work with on more than just this project?
Well, just remember for me, like how kind of fresh and green I was, like I'd written, I think, 2 issues of The Other Side before I wrote Scalp #1. Had just met Will, had just sort of started to get a peek of like being on the other side of the table, so to speak. So I was completely fresh faced and brand new. So one hand, I had no idea what I was doing. I was figuring it out as I went along, and it's hard to even look forward and then think like, yeah, for sure we'll get 60, 70 issues, however many we need to tell this. I never thought that would happen because nobody knew who I was. Nobody knew who Gara was here in the States. He had done a lot of stuff in Spain and France, but had done nothing here. So I remember like the first time I went to San Diego Comic-Con, first time I met Will Dennis in person. And, after I'd kind of signed to do these books and was starting to work on them, Will takes me to dinner one night, and I'm sitting at dinner between Brian Azzarello and Brian K. Vaughan, and I'm, trying not to freak out. Like, these are 2 of my favorite writers. Both of them were very, very sweet to me, very kind. But Azzarello at one point did start kind of needling me, asking me, like, what was the ending of Scalped? Like, did I know? I hadn't even, started writing the fucking thing yet, but he's asking me like, what is the ending? And I didn't have an answer. So he said, well, you need to figure that out. So even though that ending I wouldn't actually write for years, like I did, I figured it out then. So as part of that, initial pitch, one of those early versions of the pitch, that was all in there. It was, this is the beginning, this is the middle, this is the end, this is where it's going. And that was because of Brian. And the other thing I learned from Brian, I think I read in an interview with him, is when he first pitched 100 Bullets, Karen asked him, if this book doesn't catch on and you get canceled, can you wrap it up in 12 issues? And he lied and said yes. And I kind of went with the same idea. I always felt like, the story has to be what it has to be, and I'm going to write it like I've got all the time in the world to tell it. And if I get the call someday that you're like, well, you need to wrap it up in 5 issues or whatever, then that'll suck and you'll have to figure it out and it'll be a lesser version. But I'm not going to write in fear of that phone call. I'm just going to assume, yeah, shit, like we'll get to do this for years. And then surprisingly enough, we did. And yeah, I'm really, really proud of that entire series. I think you can see me kind of figuring out, getting better as I go along, figuring out more about what I'm doing. Gara and I kind of, fitting together more and more. He and I worked on that book for years before we had ever met face to face. There was one year he came to New York Comic Con, which was the first time he'd ever been in the States. And he and I were sharing a hotel room together. So I was wondering, like, well, shit, this will either work out great or it'll be like the end of Scalped, but we got along great. I've been to his house in Barcelona and hung out, and yeah, clearly we've worked together on multiple other things at this point, and I feel like we'll probably always be working together as long as we're both still kicking.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, I love what the two of you did. I mean, you're saying you like that was still pretty fresh when you started Scalp, but that was one hell of a first issue to kind of get that entry point into that world. It's a story that, like I said, I really love, and I did want to ask because I wish I could recommend it more to people in the shop, but it's not in print. So I was curious, and I know it's in print in black and white and Spain because that's what Armgara told me when I talked to him. Why don't we have it in print in the States?
Well, I don't know if all of it's out of. I'm unclear at this point, like kind of what's in print, what's not, because they did these nice deluxe hardcover editions of all the volumes. There's five of those. Is that right? I think
there's five.
Which I'm sure those are out of print now, but then they started doing trade paperback, kind of the same editions, just in trade paperback form, and they never finished those. I think they did 3, and that was kind of right before the end of Vertigo and all those books that are being republished now are under their Black Label. So Scalped has been published under the Black Label banner in France and other places, but not yet here. So yeah, I mean, I have questions about that too. That hopefully can get answered soon.
Okay. All right. I mean, is there any chance that the rights, I mean, well, I'm sure you have it, but like maybe the publishing rights could revert to you so that you could publish it through a different company, or is that forever tied up with Vertigo?
I mean, I think that's always a possibility. I got the rights to the other side back and published that through Image, but that's a whole, other conversation. It's not a thing that we're talking about right now.
Okay. All right, cool. Well, so let's go from Scalp now. Then, like, you went to Marvel and you did a slew of stuff. Your Wolverine stuff, your Ghost Rider, your X-Men stuff. But what was my favorite was Thor. Can you talk about leading into Thor? If you could take me from the time like when you jumped over to Marvel, because you didn't do any stuff at DC really, which I would have thought you would have done like maybe some stuff at DC.
Well, I did one issue of one thing. I did Joker's Asylum Penguin one shot, which I I'm still really proud of. I did it with Jason Pearson, so it looks really gorgeous, and I really liked my take on the Penguin. It was a really dark and creepy version of the Penguin, and Batman's in it for one panel, I think, or kind of Batman silhouette. But yeah, that's the only DCU thing I ever did.
So can you talk about like why, or did you not want to do DC stuff? Or did you always want to kind of go over to Marvel? Were you gravitated more towards those characters?
No, I mean, on one hand, I was a DC kid. Like I said, I grew up. The New Teen Titans was kind of the first book I flipped for, and Swamp Thing and Batman, like Blue Devil. Those were kind of the books that made me fall in love with comics. So I grew up as much more of a DC fan than Marvel. Really, I won that Marvel Talent Search contest at with the Wolverine story, and kind of that was the first time I'd sort of got my foot in the door and just kind of started pitching to sort of whoever I could get an email address for, basically, which is what a lot of people do when they're trying to break in. Just anybody will give you the time of the day. You're like, okay, well, what does that person edit? Okay, well, here's a Punisher pitch or Captain America pitch or whoever it is. And I did a lot of that. Not, none of it ever went anywhere. And just got very frustrating. And I realized like this is, it's not really the way I want to do it, and became more focused just on specific editors. Looked at the books I like to read and could see common editors
Mhm.
among a lot of those. So I kind of targeted, again, Will Dennis at Vertigo and Axel Alonso at Marvel were two of the main guys that I'm like, all right, I like all the books these dudes edit. Never met them, but chances are we have similar sensibilities. So I feel like they might respond to my work. So I kind of started to focus more on those kind of relationships than chasing specific characters. It was sort of like, okay, I want to work with Axel. Well, what characters does Axel edit?
Mhm.
Um, and then, okay, well, do I have a Ghost Rider pitch? Do I have another Wolverine story? So it was more about that than just chasing, oh, I really want to write Batman or I really want to write Spider-Man. Certainly I have characters like that I'd love to tackle someday, but I've always found it's better to sort of, look at the situation and the human relationships involved as opposed to just your relationship to the character. Yeah, I was certainly up for doing more DC stuff. That one shot I did was with Mike Martz, who had been at Marvel. He was the guy who picked me as the winner of the Marvel Talent Search contest.
Mhm.
A few years later, he's at DC working in the Bat Office, so he gave me that gig, and I was talking to him. Like I could have done some stuff on Robin, I think around that time. I didn't really, I didn't have like a Robin story I was dying to tell. But so yeah, did not a whole lot of traction really from DC. I don't feel like I'm talking out of school by saying this, but even when Marvel offered me an exclusive after I started doing stuff with Axel and started doing Ghost Rider, they offered me an exclusive, and I told Will about it, and not in a like, hey, I want to start a bidding war between you guys, but just like, hey, just so you know,
Mhm.
um, I'm probably going to do this and won't affect Scalp or anything. And they sort of ran that up the flagpole at DC, and kind of the answer I got sort of helped me feel like I was making the right decision. Like there just didn't seem to be a whole lot of interest over there for me. And I even, Dan DiDio, I didn't know at the time. Like I saw a few times after that, and I could get the sense that they felt like maybe they should have offered me more, which I appreciated. I'm still happy with the decision I made and with the way things went. Still have a lot of love for those characters, and as far as I'm concerned, doors are always open. Down the line.
Yeah, I grew up a DC fan. I love both, obviously, but I always wondered that question, like what, like you were already there technically with DC, and yeah, they should have offered you more because look what you went on to do. You went on to do so many great runs with so many awesome characters.
Well, I think that I think you can see after that they started to snap up guys. I think who are kind
Yeah.
of as they should. Like these guys are already right there in your backyard.
Hmm.
So you saw Scott Snyder and Jeff Lemire, two of the kind of I think you'd call Vertigo guys, right? Who
Right.
pretty quickly got put onto big DCU books. So I'm not saying that's all because of me, but again, I think it was that weird time of that sort of the tail end of Vertigo, and um, like me and Jeff and Scott are kind of probably some of the last people to really break in through Vertigo
Hmm.
before it went away.
Yeah. And so it was like I said, you did Punisher, you did Ghost Rider, you did Wolverine. Um, was Thor always a character that you felt like you had like a good like run in you, like that you wanted to like build this out?
For Thor,
Yeah.
no, not not at all, really. I hadn't read a lot of Thor. I'd read the Simonson stuff,
Hmm.
at least a lot of it, again from my spinner rack days. But I really never thought about Thor, about doing Thor. I had been kind of penciled in for a while to do Captain America. I was going to take over Captain America after Ed Brubaker, which I mean that is that's a crazy spot to be in.
Yeah.
But I was excited about that. I was excited to do Cap, and then we kind of hit that period of what became, I think it was Marvel Now was the tagline, where suddenly like all the books were changing hands.
Hmm.
Like everything was switching up. So it really became a question of like, well, what do you want to do? Because everything's available. And then at that time, I had really liked Matt Fraction's Thor Ages of Thunder one shots that he did. I think there were 3 of them,
Hmm.
which were very much like, you know, kind of a heavy metal Thor in a way I hadn't seen before. I hadn't thought of the character. So I really liked that. Was reading those was the first time I was like, oh, okay, I think I might like to do some Thor stuff. And then suddenly the book was available. So I said, I think I'd rather hold off on Cap and do Thor right now. It just seemed like, for whatever reason, it felt right to me in the moment. I still didn't have a pitch. I didn't have a story. I just felt like, I think this is what I want to do right now.
Hmm.
And then pretty quickly had Esad on board. I think Esad was one of like the first artists who'd been assigned to a Marvel Now book. So I knew, okay, it's Thor by me and Esad. And then I was like, all right, I guess I should figure out a story. But I think knowing it was going to be Esad, helped shape what that story was and what I was thinking, knowing, because I could sit there thinking of that script and see those Esad drawings in my head and know how he was going to knock it out of the park. So I think just that, especially that first God Butcher story, just combining, big crazy sci-fi stuff with fantasy, with horror, with superhero stuff, just sort of mixing that all up in a big pot. On a trying to do it on as grand and epic a scale as possible, just to make a statement about how Thor is different from all these other characters in the Marvel universe, right? Like what
Hmm.
sets Thor apart? And for me, it was leaning into that idea of him being a god. I didn't never liked that idea of well, the Asgardians are kind of aliens that we perceive to be gods. No, I mean, I like when you read Stan talking about why they started doing Thor in the first place. That was the idea. Is like how to do a superhero who's different. Well, what if he's a god? It's a super god.
Right.
Like that's how Thor is different from anybody else. So I wanted to emphasize that, lean into that idea of godhood and worthiness, and the unique setting that Thor stories provided, and the fact that he exists on a kind of different timeline than these other characters. So you could do a story like God Bomb that stretches across thousands and thousands of years. Involves different versions of that character at different points in his life. To me, that was kind of coming out of the gate, making a statement of like, this is who Thor is. This is what sets him apart. This is why he's cool. This is why you should think he's cool. I think that's an important thing. Whatever the book is that you're doing, when you're coming into it with 60 years, however long, of previous stories, you
Hmm.
can't expect everybody to have read any of those, to be invested in this character, to know like, why should I give a shit about this character? You have to show them, right? So
Right.
that was very much me showing you like, this is what I like about this character. This is what I think is cool. If you think it's cool, stick around. We've got some more stuff to show you.
Yeah, like I said, like I liked Thor. but it was really I think your run on Thor is my favorite Marvel run of that I've ever read, and I've read a lot of comics
Oh, thanks.
from beginning to end. I mean, like you said, like Azarello asked you the question, do you have the ending for Scalped? Did you have any kind of end game when you wrote that first arc? Did you have a clue of like, well, this is where I'm going to start, and then eventually, if given the opportunity, I want to end here, like where you ended with King Thor?
I knew pretty quickly. I think while I was working on God Butcher, I think my initial pitch had, it had more than just those first two arcs. It had other ideas in there.
Mm-hmm.
Like I think that the Shi'ar Asgard War was in there initially, um, and the kind of the beginnings of the War of the Realms stuff. So I knew pretty quickly I was building towards this big war. At some point along the way, pretty early on, I figured out exactly what that ending would be. So that last scene of King Thor number 4, is that
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Where it's like this, kind of caveman telling the story of Thor to these kids around a camp. Like I wrote that, years before, so I knew
Crazy.
pretty early on, like this is going to be it, of how Thor would go off and just sort of the legend of him.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, meant to be caveman father looking up at the sky and his kid frightened of thunder and him explaining what that thunder is. So, yeah, I knew that would be the ending. Things, changed and morphed and grew along the way. But, really kind of right after God Bomb, we start digging into exploring the realms. And that was very much already, I knew that was building towards the War of the Realms. Part
Mm-hmm.
of it came from me. Like I said, I hadn't read a whole ton of Thor comics as a kid. I mean, I did kind of once I got the gig. I went back and started at the beginning and read shitloads of Thor comics, and especially I'd never read any of those, the original Lee Kirby Thor. I'd read a lot of other early Lee Kirby Marvel stuff, but had never read any of those. And I think that's there's a period there, especially all the Mangog stuff around then, that is some of my favorite Kirby ever. But I didn't know. I knew there were these different realms that were a part of Thor's setting, right? And that's one of the
Mm-hmm.
things that's cool is he's got these places he goes to that nobody else does. But I couldn't tell you like, well, which one's the ice one, which one's fire, and where did the
Mm-hmm.
elves live? I didn't know all that, and kind of the way they'd been shown different times over the years, they weren't consistent. So part of that was like, okay, I'm going to learn like what's Fartelheim, what's Jotunheim,
Mm-hmm.
and I want to show the readers. I want the readers to know, like, okay, this is what this realm looks like. This is who lives there. Are they good guys? Are they bad guys? What's their culture like? So it's really just about world building for, Thor's setting was really the inspiration for the what would eventually be the War of the Realms. It would take us years to get there, but that was the plan all along.
It felt like you knew, like, because I've read it again also multiple times. So like when I go back and read it, I'm like, man, how did he like there's so much that's going on, and from the first issue until King Thor 4, like there's just so much, and it didn't seem like you ever were like, oh well, I guess I'll just fit this in here to kind of stretch it out. Like it felt like one massive epic, and it really is one of the greatest comic runs of all time. And what I enjoy too is that like there's a huge chunk where we don't even have Thor as Thor because he becomes unworthy with what happens in Original Sin. And then you introduce a female Thor and the mystery behind that. I mean, I know there's some people probably that complain like, why are you making Thor a woman? But they obviously have not read the comic if they don't understand that it was a natural progression of what you were telling. And I didn't know much about Thor, and I definitely didn't read much about Jane Foster because then the runs prior to yours, she wasn't a factor. And you made me care about her. I loved her as Thor just as much as I love Thor Odinson. You know what I mean? Like just as much. And I think you made her such a fascinating character to see her growth from that time and fighting cancer and like continuing to fight even though she knows that it's taking the chemo out of her. So she's risking her life constantly to save lives. And I just think it's such a powerful message. I want to hear the idea behind that, and then also after you tell me why you chose to do that, my buddy Dylan wanted me to ask because he loves the Thor one just as much. What is it? And I want to know too. What does it feel like to have characters in storylines that you created that aren't even that old and are now going to be in a film by Oscar-winning actors? You got Natalie Portman's going to be Jane Foster Thor. You got Christian Bale as Gore. I mean, it's insane. Like I can't remember the last time a story that's this new has been adapted into a film.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'll answer that part. Yeah, it's incredibly exciting. Hearing about Christian Bale playing Gore man, I can't wait to see him sink his teeth into that, right?
Yeah.
And I'm a huge fan of Taika Waititi. I think Jojo Rabbit's one of my favorite movies of the last few years. I really, really love that movie. So I'm excited for all that. And yeah, it's incredibly gratifying for the response that book has gotten. Seeing Marvel Studios pick up on it so quickly, because it is, it's one of the things I think I'm most proud of in all my time in comics is that Jane Foster Thor run. I mean, my Thor run in particular, I'm proud of the whole thing, but that Jane part to me was something different. Sure, I still hear from the same people who don't like the idea of her becoming Thor. They say that it's literally the same things that people said when the book got announced. It got announced on The View years ago. It became a huge story. So nobody even read the book then. Now it's been out for years and people still make the same comments. And a lot of those comments, complaints, things people would point out. People love to tell me that his name is Thor. Like I get that. I do know his name is Thor. So how can she be Thor? Those are all things that are in the story, right? Like things people would say like that. I'm not going to go around answering everybody on Twitter. If I want to answer it, the characters answered that and address it in the story. So a lot of those comments are there in the book. Now you still may not like the answer, but the story should speak for itself as opposed to me having to speak for it. I will just say, for me, the Jane Foster Thor story was the most Thor of any story I did in my mind. Because if you go back to the first appearance of Thor, that first story is, Donald Blake goes in this cave and picks up this cane and it turns into a hammer and transforms him into the mighty Thor. This hammer that had that inscription on it, that inscription we saw many, many times over the years. Now, granted, that's like Stan and Jack did a retcon, right? Like we're criticized now anytime we're considered retconning things, but Thor was retconned pretty quickly, and that we found out, well, Donald Blake wasn't really a guy who was transformed by the hammer. He was Thor all along, and he was being taught a lesson in humility. And but then, of course, Simonson brought that inscription back in a huge way with the Beta Ray Bill story when he did pick it up and was transformed by Thor. So that idea of transformation, that anybody could pick up that hammer and have the power of Thor, that is built into the character from their very first appearance. And Jane Foster is there too. Jane Foster was the initial love interest, the nurse to Donald Blake's doctor. So she's been there the whole time too. So a human coming along and picking up that hammer and being transformed by it is not an idea I made up on my own and shoved into the mythology that has been there all along. And for her particular situation, where she's a human woman who is, in a period of great sickness and weakness, physical weakness, where she's battling cancer, and then she goes and picks up this hammer and transforms her into a god who can fly through space and perform all these amazing feats. And like you said, at the same time, that's killing her more and more. Like that, to me, of anything I've ever done at Marvel, is the most Marvel right? Of
Mhm.
story, going back to kind of those original, what made Marvel different from DC is, their characters had problems and struggles, and that to me is a Marvel idea. And even, we even went back to her having a secret identity where people didn't know she was Thor, and we got back to that idea, like you used to have with the Donald Blake Thor, where if Jane was separated from the Hammer for too long, she would change back into Jane. So there were times where it's like, you got to get that hammer or you're going to change. That's all like old school Marvel stuff. So there, to me, you cannot, like, you can, again, like or dislike whatever story you don't, and go read the stuff that makes you happy. But no one can look at the Jane Foster story and tell me that it is not a quintessentially Marvel story and a quintessentially Thor story. Because I just don't buy it.
Like I said, I love the entire run, but I do really, really love the Jane Foster stuff. Plus, you got Russell Dodderman on one of the most high-profile books. The first time I saw his work was on like a Nightwing fill-in before that book was canceled, and then I saw him on this, and it's just like with him, Matt Wilson. I mean, just the entire team of what you guys did was phenomenal. Where they all end up at the end with Jane Foster, she doesn't have the power of Thor, but now she's Valkyrie, and seeing the progression of her character has just been really cool to watch. And I'm glad that you kind of still have a little bit of a hand in what's going on with her. Co-writing the Valkyrie book. It really is one of the best runs, I think, in comic books. I recommend it all the time to people. It's just a really special run, and what you told, the story that you told, and the way you told it was unlike any Thor run I'd ever read before.
I think got really spoiled with the artists I got to work with over the course of that run, right? From
Yeah,
Assad to Russell to Olivier Coipel on Unworthy Thor, and Mike
Mike
Del
Del
Mundo.
Mundo. Woo! Yeah.
And then, Russell again at the end for War of the Realm. So
Mhm.
yeah, it was amazing. Amazing group of artists. Russell in particular, you saw him just getting better and better and better. Like every issue he was doing, it was a lot. He had to draw a lot, design a lot. Um, but I think he killed it. I think all those artists really killed it.
Mhm.
And yeah, thanks. I'm really really proud of that. That was kind of the first book. I'd written a lot of stuff for Marvel before that. I wrote Wolverine for about as many years as I did Thor, just kind of in different books and different series. But when I got Thor, it was kind of the first time I'd been there long enough and sort of felt enough confidence to say, like, all right, like I'm going to be here until this is done. I'm going to lay tracks that are going to take a long time to pay off, and I'm just going to write it until someone literally takes it away from me or the story's done.
Mhm.
And thankfully, that's what happened. There were a couple times where I had opportunities to do something else that would have meant I had to come off Thor sooner, and I said no. I don't. Whatever that is, I don't want to do it. Like, I'm going to stay and finish this. And some point knew, like, okay, like someday when I die, Thor writer is going to be some, in that first paragraph of my obituary, right? Like, this is the one of the things I think I'll be remembered for.
Mhm.
And I'm happy with that. I'm really proud of that.
And like the fact that you stayed on for so long, we rarely see that in modern comics as well. Like it's rare nowadays where I could be like, oh, go to this run by this creative team, and you didn't really switch up artists too much. It was like like you for the most part had artists with on big chunks. It's something that I miss because like when I was a kid, like you're talking about the Teen Titans book, Wolfman and Perez, like that's years together, right? And I think that that's another reason why this run is so popular because like it's one vision, right? Like we got your story that you set out to tell, and I'm glad you never left. Thank God you didn't jump off that book.
Thanks. I mean, it
Yeah.
is, that's not an easy thing to do these days, right? Like, I mean, you're talking about, like you said, this, I'm glad you feel that way, that this is a one run that feels like a singular vision, but it is one run that you know goes from multiple different ongoing series and mini series. I know, I have people ask me on Twitter all the time, like, what order do I read your Thor in? And I know that's confusing. Like, you can
Mhm.
certainly Google it. And there are plenty of people who've mapped it out of like, well, read this, then read that, and read that. And there's trade paperback collections that are just my Thor run all collected together, and I'm sure someday there'll be a big omnibus. But it is kind of the nature of the way things are now that books are going to get relaunched sporadically, and a big crossover will happen, and you'll have to tie into that, or your book goes away for a bit, or whatever. You have to roll with all that, and it's hard. If you're relaunching a book for the third time, like, how do you justify doing that if it's the same person writing it?
Mhm.
Does that mean you have to change the artist? Well, what if you don't want to change the artist? So you have those things are hard to roll with, and I think make it harder for anybody to do a long run like
Mhm.
that, right? I mean, we've certainly seen some. We saw Dan Slott write Spider-Man longer than anybody, right?
Yeah.
And Bendis did Avengers for a long time. So we've seen some of those, but I think they just are getting harder and harder, just the nature of the way things are now.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, I mean, again, for me, it took me kind of like putting roots down and saying, I'm not fucking going anywhere unless you make me, or we finish.
And that's good on Marvel that they didn't pull you off the book, because like I think that would have been a disservice to not only you, to the other creators on the book, but to the fans of the character, fans of the run as well. And during that time, I always thought like you do a really good job with like solo characters, right? Like you dabbled with X-Men stuff, but it's your character work is what really draws me to your writing. You've in the middle, like towards the end of Thor, you pick up Avengers. Was that a book that you kind of like? I mean, you said Cap. Cap's actually a character that I not that long ago told my friend, like, I think Jason Aaron would do a really good Cap run. Like, I don't know what it is. I just felt like that would be a cool character for you to do. Why Avengers though?
Well, I think it seemed like the right time to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Again, sort of like with Thor, just seemed like this is the time now to do that. Um, yeah, I mean, I do really love writing Cap. I could think you can see from the different Cap moments I've put in Avengers or in War of the Realms. I had some
Mm-hmm.
Cap moments I was really happy with. I do really, really like writing Cap. Um, but yeah, I think it was just the right time. It was the right thing to do after Thor. I knew some of the stuff I'd been doing in Thor I could kind of carry over to Avengers. And some of the ideas I'd had for Thor kind of morphed into like the prehistoric Avengers that have uh, been dealing with. So it's natural extension to kind of roll some of that stuff into Avengers.
Yeah. Speaking of like the prehistoric Avengers, you, I mean, as of now, I mean, like in the last issue I read, you made Phoenix, the Phoenix Force, Thor's mom. Was that something that you had always kind of thought about, like while you were writing Thor, and you just never got a chance to do it? Or is this going to spoil something if you answer this question in any way?
Well, I mean, certainly I'm not going to spoil like what's coming up on stories we haven't told yet. And again, clearly, whatever is going on here, we've just started to tell it. But
Mm-hmm.
I will say, I mean, you go back and look at the Thor. I've done a lot of Thor stuff, done a lot of Phoenix stuff. Those two worlds have crossed over at times. We've seen, there was a reference during the Mighty Thor where when Jane encountered the Phoenix, where she could tell the Phoenix had some kind of feelings for Thor she didn't understand. She asked, did you used to date the Phoenix? Like she didn't
Mm-hmm.
understand what that meant. We have seen that Odin and the prehistoric Phoenix had a relationship. Saying there's some kind of connection there we don't fully understand yet. It's not coming completely out of the blue. It's literally stuff I've pointed at for 5 years now. I mean,
Right.
a while. And that, yeah, and I'm not done. The it's clearly just the next little bit of whatever that overall story is.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I'm very excited to see what else you got going on with Avengers. I mean, it's like a huge blockbuster movie. It's completely like it has a completely different tone than we were getting from Thor, but it's a super fun book. I loved how you play with the lineup. I mean, you have Blade in there, you have Robbie Ray as Ghost Rider. Like you're really bringing characters into this Avengers world that we didn't see before, and I find that like very entertaining and like very cool departure than from the runs that we had previously, going all the way back to like Bendis and stuff.
Thanks. Yeah, I've tried to do each arc as kind of a big event, basically, right? Like it's
Hmm.
an event that still just takes place in the pages of this one book. To do a big cast of iconic characters, big villains, and again, kind of big ongoing threats. I didn't want it to be just we bring in a villain, the Avengers beat them, they disappear. I wanted to kind of shape part of the globe and set up different kind of ongoing challenges. So part of that is bringing back the Russian Winter Guard in a big way and changing the status quo of Atlantis and giving the vampires a place of their own,
Hmm.
and all that stuff is kind of still ongoing. So yeah, it's about making each arc big, fun. It also continue to change from arc to arc. That just in the last few we did a big space arc. We did Moon Knight versus the Avengers. Basically, after this Phoenix arc wraps up, we've got a King in Black tie-in that mostly focuses on Blade and kind of changes his status quo. And coming up after Heroes Reborn, we've got an arc I'm really excited about. I can't say what it is or anything, but I just say it's got a very different kind of tone and flavor than what we've been doing, maybe a little darker and grittier. And so, I like writing all these characters, want to keep giving them big stories. I think it could be clear from kind of the stuff I've laid in that it's all building to something that's getting bigger and crazier as it goes. And,
Hmm.
we're approaching Avengers issue 50, which will be kind of, I think, a big, how should I say? There'll be a lot of big shit in that issue. Say some of it will bring some of the stuff I've been playing with starts to come to a head, but also kind of brings in some surprising new developments.
Okay, I'm very excited. So, can you talk a little bit about Heroes Reborn, and is it because of like the anniversary, and how is it playing into like your overall Avengers like narrative? Like, how is it going to be worked in?
The anniversary of Heroes Reborn?
Yeah.
No. I mean, the story wise, it very much grew out of what I've been doing in Avengers with the Squadron Supreme.
Right.
And I had an idea to do, the story, again, like we've seen many times before, where our characters wake up one day and the world as they know it has been changed during the
Hmm.
night. Like everything is different. In Heroes Reborn, number one, that's Blade, who wakes up and he seems to be the only one who remembers, like, this shit's not right. Uh, and there are no Avengers. Nobody has ever heard of the Avengers. They have
Right.
never existed. So a lot of the characters we know, their lives have gone very differently. Peter Parker, Tony Stark, Reed Richards. None of those people turned out to be the superheroes that we know. Instead, the Earth's mightiest heroes, the heroes at the center of this world, are now and have always been the Squadron Supreme of America. So, Heroes Reborn is really about kind of throwing us into the middle of that world. We get bits and pieces of how that has changed. Like I said, those heroes that we know, the villains that we know, and some of the most famous stories from Marvel's past. So, the first time Galactus came to Earth to eat it,
Hmm.
there was no Fantastic Four to stop him. So what happened? Well, we'll see.
Oh shit. Okay.
When a civil war was fought, there was no Captain America, there was no Iron Man. So who was that civil war fought between and why? We'll see some of that. So to me, it was having a lot of fun, basically reimagining what the Marvel universe would look like with these very, very different characters at its center. And the idea was always to do, I mean, Heroes Reborn and then Heroes Return is how it's branded and how it's published, but it's a little different than just an 8-issue miniseries. And that first issue is big oversized issue drawn by Ed McGuinness, and it gives us sort of the layout, throws us head first into this world and introduces all these different characters. After that, every issue for a bit focuses on a different character. So the issue 2 it focuses on Hyperion. So it's basically like, if this has always been the Marvel Universe, this is the issue of Hyperion that we would get in comics that month. So this would be Hyperion
cool.
number 852 or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So it gives you ideas of like, this is, who Hyperion's main bad guys are. This is some of the stories he's been involved with in the past. And then, the issue after that, we do that for Dr. Spectrum, and then Blur, and then Power Princess and Nighthawk, and we kind of go through all those individual characters, and then there's a Squadron Supreme one before we get the very last issue, which kind of brings everything crashing back together. And running through those individual issues, we also get backup stories drawn by Ed McGuinness, where, like I said, in that first issue, Blade is the only one who remembers things, and he starts going around trying to find anybody else who possibly remembers or reform the Avengers, basically. So we follow that story in the backups. But those main stories, are also drawn by an incredible group of different artists, which is, I think the pandemic and the sort of shutdown kind of helped things, and then I was able to get ahead and write all of these issues because there was a time me saying like, all right, I want to do this 8-issue thing and I want to write all 8 of them and have them come out quickly. It wouldn't be an 8-month thing. Like, this is 8 issues over the course of 2 months. So thankfully I was able to write them all, last year. So we could go out and get this really amazing group of artists. So you have, for Hyperion, you have Del Keown, who, I've worked with on Avengers a few times now. Mm-hmm. James Stokoe is drawing Dr. Supreme. So I got some more Stokoe pages in my email today, and it's just like, holy shit.
That's
like
dope.
I just
That's so dope.
Sit and stare at them for a while. And, R.M. Guerra, who we were talking about before, is drawing the Nighthawk issue.
Yeah.
So it's a really stellar, diverse group of artists, a lot of whom I've never worked with before, that are getting to kind of bring this whole other world to life. So I'm really excited. I think it's, it's the kind of story, I think it's a little hard to sum up exactly what it is. Mm-hmm. I think you gotta kind of pick it up and read it, and then people will see, oh, okay, I see what this is now.
Yeah, I'm stoked for it. I'm excited. I'm glad it's coming out like in a short period of time, so I can get the whole story really fast. I'm very excited to see this. Like, I love these like what if kind of stories, and like that's definitely a Marvel thing. Like, well, what if this happened and we never had them, and so you get to see all
right.
different things spin out and all these different characters and see where they would have been if this didn't happen. So I'm very excited for that.
Thanks. Yeah, I think you can see from reading it just how much fun I was having writing it. It's a really tremendous amount of fun. And I think you can see me pouring a lot of my love of comics, going back to those days of picking up books off the spinner rack. I think you can see all that in the pages of this. So I'm really, really excited for that to come out. And again, really excited for people to see this crazy array of artists we've got working on it.
Dude, James Stokoe? Fuck. I just read his Orphans and the Five Beasts this week, and that was just insanity. I need to get Wonton Soup. That's a book that I haven't been able to pick up yet. And then I know he did a Godzilla one. He did Alien. This dude, what a talent, man. And then R.M. Guerra, he actually showed me at the beginning of the pandemic, he showed me a piece of art with Nighthawk. I'm like, what is that from? So it's like, I'm like, why did you show me that? And I have no idea where it's gonna be. I saw the solicit, and I'm like, holy shit! Like he was working on it months ago, you know. Like so, I mean, that page alone, like I love his art. Thank God for Scalped, because I probably would have never discovered his art if not for that book. You know? And I'm loving all these like artists you got coming on the book. I mean,
Thanks. Yeah, we've been working on it for a while. And Gara has also, finished the last issue of the Virgin Brides, which is about to go to print.
okay.
Which I think is probably the best looking thing I've ever seen him do. I mean, I felt like that at different times with this volume of the goddamn, but in particular this last one, it's a big oversized issue and a lot of a lot of big crazy stuff happens, and he really completely killed it. So I'm excited for people to see that. It'll be a weird 1-2 punch to get that last goddamn issue, and then I do a Nighthawk.
Yeah, I mean, I love the goddamn. It's one of my favorite series. I mean, when he described when you two were together and you pitched him the goddamn, the way he described it, I was like, oh my god, like no wonder you wanted to do that book. That book sound like that idea is fucking insane, like with Noah and all that stuff. I do want to ask, now that you mentioned the goddamn is ending, which I mean I knew it was ending, but I'm really hoping, can we get, because I know this is more on your end, can we get a hardcover of this volume so that it will go nicely with the hardcover from the first volume? Is there a possibility you'll do that?
Yeah, there's a possibility. We'll see. I mean, I say the goddamned is ending, like the goddamned Virgin Brides. Right. It doesn't mean we'll never do more goddamn. I mean, the idea was kind of always, it was never going to be a regular sort of ongoing series. It's different stories kind of set within the same world, sort of like Ed Brubaker did for years with Criminal, where he'd jump around and tell different stories, and you'd see at times how those stories would overlap, but it's just kind of exploring a time and a place and a setting, and that's very much what we're doing here. So yeah, I mean, the idea is still those things kind of build towards the final story. But it's never going to be a book where we're telling one overall story. We can jump around and tell as many different kinds of stories as we want within that setting. So with the other hardcover, we'll see. I mean, some of it, frankly, depend on kind of how the trade sales do and that sort of thing, and what the hunger is for us to do another hardcover like that. Certainly, I'd like to, because I think Gara's art, especially on this, looks great, and the oversized format. So yeah, I'd certainly like to give you another hardcover. We'll see.
Okay. Thank you. I just knowing that you would like to do it is enough. Sure. I hope it does, and I'm excited to see the other volumes. I know that I think he said maybe 3 or 4 that you guys have talked about. So I'm really stoked for that. You're also doing Sea of Stars, which is an awesome series. I really love that, the father-son relationship. Like I really connected with that too. Being a dad. So that was something I thought was special. How far I know you're co-writing that, but how far out is that going to go? Do you have plans for more than the second volume?
We do. No, I mean, it's kind of, we got a couple more issues to go with that. The next issue that Steven's mostly through right now is in some way the end of that second arc, but then there'll kind of just be one more big oversized issue that will be the big climactic finale. You'll see by the time you get to this next one kind of where it's pretty clear, like where things are at and what's about to happen. So it'll be kind of one big oversized blowout. So I think we'll wind up, with those 2 trades, second trade a little bit bigger than the first, and then probably do one hardcover collection after that.
Nice. I mean, I know you got a lot of stuff you're working on, but is there anything else that you're working on right now, whether you can tease it or hints or whatever, or just knowing that you have other stuff going on?
Yeah, well, I mean, I've been working on King Conan. I can say that. I mean, that was basically announced over a year ago, right? Like in my last issue of Conan, it would have come out. Initially, we were planning for it to come out sometime last year, but of course, that got derailed. So that is that's still happening. I actually turned in issue 2 today, so that's moving forward. I have also been writing another Marvel project that I can't tell you what it is yet.
Is it ongoing or miniseries? Can you say that?
Um, not really. I mean, it's kind of
Okay.
that's not an
Okay.
easy question to answer.
Okay. All right.
I will just say it is something that I pitched that, sort of like when I did Thor, felt like the right time to do that book. This to me feels like the exact right time to do this book.
Okay.
And I think you'll understand it when you see it. You'll understand exactly what I meant and that I was talking about this book. I've been writing it in a way where it's bigger. Like the first issue is 35 pages, and every issue after that is 30 pages. So they're
Okay.
all
Cool.
bigger, meatier stories, which I'm really, really loving. Like having that space. I was listening to Tom King interview the other day where he was saying he's just doing stuff now that's like 24 or 28 pages, which I get. And really, it's for me is reading Strange Adventures, which I love,
That's a
and
good book. Yeah.
realizing like every issue that felt so meaty, and I was counting pages like how fucking long is this thing? Oh, that's why he's writing 28 pages. So I was jealous. Like I was like shit, I want to do that. So with this, I just said. And there's justification, there's story reasons of why these issues need to be so big that you'll see when it comes out. But it's like I need 30 pages, and I'm loving it. Like I'm loving being able to every issue it gives you the space to do big images and big moments, but also pack a lot in there. So I'm really, really loving that. I've written 3 issues of that secret
Okay.
unnamed project, which I think will be announced relatively soon.
Okay. As you're talking, I'm trying to work in my brain what it could possibly be. So
I'm not gonna give any
No.
hints,
Yeah. No.
but
You don't have to give any hints. Is it? What about the artist? Is it somebody you've worked with before? I mean, you have to tell me the artist. I'm just curious if it's a new partnership or if it's somebody you've worked with.
new partnership.
Oh, cool.
Yep.
Okay. Awesome.
There's actually 2 artists involved, and I've never worked with either one of them.
Nice.
One of them, somebody I've known. Sometimes they're those people in the business for years, and then you work with for the first time, and it's almost weird. Of like, we haven't worked together before. Like we've known each other, we've hung out in bars for years, but we've never actually worked together. But yeah, that I'm very excited about, and very excited for it to kind of get out there and see what people think of it. In addition to that, there's other Marvel stuff that I haven't started working on yet, but that I'll be working on relatively soon.
Okay.
And other creator-owned stuff too that's in the motions.
New series or return to other stuff that you've done before?
Well, both.
Okay.
Hopefully both. And I've also been working on the kind of the biggest, coolest non-comic related thing I've ever been a part of. That I'm really excited about. So it's don't mean to be a tease. That's basically a lot of stuff that I can't tell what it is.
That's fine. That's totally cool.
But the gist of it is that I'm, happy to be busy. Last year, like with a lot of people, was brutal and strange, and even at times when you had work to do, was a lot of times it was hard to do it. So this year, I'm very happy to say that I've got as much work as I can possibly handle. Not too much work, because it's not good to have too much either. But I've got a good, healthy amount of work, and I'm really jazzed about all of it.
Well, I mean, I'm here for all of it, man. I'm super stoked to find out what some of these secret projects are. And before I let you go, get back to all these projects that you're writing, I was wondering if, real quick, maybe you can just share some of the books that you're currently into, some of your favorite stuff that's coming out right now.
Yeah, I'm always bad when people ask me that. One, I read a lot. I buy a lot of comics. I'm usually behind on shit, and certainly, even I don't know about you or most people, but in the last year, you'd think like, okay, well, shit, we can't leave the house. it's a good time to like catch up on movies and catch up on books, and it hasn't worked out for me for the most part like that. Like I
Me
haven't.
either.
I think I've read less instead of more. But that, I'm kind of getting back into it now. But I will say, just this week I read the only thing I've read that I picked up at the comic store this week was James Herron's Ultra Mega,
Yeah, that shit was.
uh, which was crazy. I know he's been working on this for a while, and he's been talking about it, but it's really, if you haven't seen it, it's like this big, oversized, creepy kaiju story.
Mhm.
That if you don't know James's stuff, I think he's one of the best artists working today. I've tried to work with him multiple times. We worked together, for a bit there in my Thor run. He drew a part of 700, and then he drew Thor 701, which was Mangog, beating the living shit out of the War Thor, which James drew the hell out of.
Yeah, he's in that comic was fucking so dope. I love that. It was one of my favorite books that came out this week. Actually, came out in a while. So
Yeah, it's really good. Just that there's a scene where I won't tell you exactly what happens, but blood like goes gushing through
yes,
the street.
yes. Oh my
Blood
god.
blood floods the streets of this city to where people are drowning and getting scabbed over by a flood of
I never would,
blood.
and I never would have thought like to think of something like that too. Like I was telling my buddy, like the fact that it's coagulating and like people are like getting stuck in it. It's like,
Right.
oh my god, that was dope.
It was great. And it's all colored by Dave Stewart, so it's really, really gorgeous blood too. So that's the thing I've read most recently that I really love. I mean, I'd love, like I said, Tom King is somebody. I think every new thing he's doing, I super dig. I love Strange Adventures. I love Rorschach is really, really good. Donny Cates has been killing it. He's on everything he's doing. I really dig his Thor a lot. With Nick Klein is really super, super good.
Hmm.
He drew one issue of my Thor back in the day, like the I forgot what issue number it was now, but I think the one where we first introduced Roz Solomon, and you found out that Jane Foster
Right.
had cancer, right? Wasn't that all the same issue?
I
I think.
think so.
Shit, fuck, I don't remember. Sometimes I get a trade or a hardcover and I open it and look through it, and I was like, shit, did I write this? I don't remember this. Like, oh, that's pretty good. Or like, ah, shit, I wish I'd changed that line. But yeah, those guys are killing it.
All right, cool, man. Well, again, thank you so much for taking time to chat with me. It's been an honor, a privilege, all that. Before we leave, though, if real quick, maybe you could just share where everybody can find you online, and I'm going to drop all those links down below in the comments.
Sure, I kind of post sporadically online. Sometimes I post a bunch. Sometimes I'll disappear for periods of time. But I'm on Twitter. It's Jason Aaron. Post about wrestling and football.
Hmm.
I'm on Instagram under my name. I also have a newsletter that I do. And if you're on either my Twitter or Instagram, it's got a link to my website, jasonaaron.info, info, and you can subscribe to my newsletter there. And I'm still kind of figuring out exactly how I want to do that. I'm trying to do more than just sort of hey, I've got a book in stores this week. Here's a reminder. I
Hmm.
try to actually write something and say something whenever I send one. So it might be weird and personal or me talking about work I've done in the past. Who knows? All sorts of different things. And I'm actually, like, I just moved, just got new shelves for all my long boxes. I got a shitload of comics in my basement. Um, so moving and sorting things out, I've been pulling out a lot of old books I haven't read in a while. So I think for my newsletter, I'll start kind of writing about books from my basement. So me writing about,
Cool.
a book like Blue Devil or Roach Mill, if anybody remembers Roach Mill from Dark Horse back in the day, a book that I love. So just writing about stuff that I read growing up and I think, it's weird to go back and look at the stuff I read and now look at the stuff I write. And times I can be like, oh, okay, I see why I did that.
All right, cool, man. Well, like I said, thank you again. I'm gonna drop all those links down below. Everybody sign up for the newsletter because I always enjoy reading those myself. And Jason, thank you so much. And hopefully, I would love to be able to do this with you again sometime in the future.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks, Ryan. This was fun.